Today's training is on inoculation and the BOSS campaign. You're here in the ARC. So, we started with leader ID. We moved on to mapping the workplace. We, did role play conversations to demonstrate how you would do that. Last week, you talked about how you were going to go public and escalate your campaign. And now that you've gone public, the boss is going to have a response. And so today's training is all about how to deal with that. If this is the last training, if you've been to all of the previous trainings and you're now finished with the course, then you are welcome to move on to our mentorship program. You'll get a final exam. Once you pass, you'll get an interest form. Once you fill that out, you'll be matched with an appropriate mentor. Our advanced organizers are really knowledgeable and experienced and super helpful, and they'll help you either take on cases in your industry, or you'll shadow them and see how they work. As always, please refrain from using identifying information in your questions because this is a public training. And today, I'm very excited. Our trainer is Colleen Quincy from Unite Here. She's been with them since 2014 and has organized all around the country, Orlando, Indianapolis, Houston, and now is in Chicago. So Colleen, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen. I am going to talk about what inoculation is. I've been in a bunch of internal, external campaigns all across the country. And bosses can be crafty, but usually are not. And so let's talk about how to overcome a boss campaign. And so a good place to start is, what is inoculation? I think a good place to start for me is what not inoculation is. So in my very first campaign, I organized my coworkers at my university as a food service worker, and I organized them for a year and a half. And the day that I was like in the car going to ask my coworker to sign the union card. I got, my organizer, I think, just was like, you got to talk to her about dues. What are you going to say? And I had a complete meltdown because no one ever talked to me about dues. And so I freaked out. I got really nervous about what that would mean for me. And if I could convince my coworkers, I wasn't ready for that. And so inoculation is the very opposite of that. Inoculation is making sure your leaders are confident and ready and walking them through what the reactions of the bosses are going to be, what the reaction of their coworkers are going to be, and really laying out the kind of the usual tools, tricks, and traps that has been used for bosses for, decades now. Next slide. So like I said, why do you inoculate, right? You inoculate to make sure you yourself are confident and prepared for the boss's campaign. And bosses ain't dumb, right? They know that inoculation is brilliant, and they do it in their own way. And so we have this little Amazon video example to show you how bosses, quite well. And so I think they're sending you in the chat so you can listen to it, because the video doesn't go over well over video.
Yeah, so folks, I just dropped the YouTube link into the chat. This is a video that's coming to us from our friends over at Whole Workers, and this is the video that Amazon plays for any of their employees as they are first getting hired on into the facility. As you're watching this video, try to notice what it sounds funny to us. Try to notice what sounds innocuous, what doesn't sound, like it's explicitly bad, what might actually slip in as an earworm or get under your skin or get into your head. Try to think from it from the point of view of somebody who isn't currently thinking about how to organize a workplace.
Welcome. We're excited to have you at this training, specifically designed to give you the tools that you need for success when it comes to labor organizing. During this course, we'll cover several important topics, such as our position on unions, associate rights, signs of employee disengagement, and how to identify, escalate, and address associate concerns. We are not anti-union, but we are not neutral either. We will boldly defend our direct relationship with associates as best for the associate, the business, and our shareholders. We do not believe unions are in the best interest of our customers, our shareholders, or most importantly, our associates. Our business model is built upon speed, innovation, and customer obsession, things that are generally not associated with unions. When we lose sight of those critical focus areas, we jeopardize everyone's job security. We don't badmouth unions in general, but we will speak openly with associates about unions, including any specific concerns about particular unions involved in organizing. And we share our preference for a direct working relationship frequently and boldly, even when no organizing activity has occurred. You will learn about the warning signs most commonly associated with early union organizing, as well as other warning signs that could indicate associate disengagement, vulnerability to organizing, or early organizing activity. While employees have the right to organize, we have a right and responsibility to share our position that a direct working relationship is better for the customer, the company, and the associate. In order to be able to do that effectively, it is critical that we recognize the early warning signs of potential organizing and escalate concerns promptly. If you see warning signs of potential organizing, notify your building HRM and GM site leader immediately. HRMs and GM site leaders should notify their assigned ER managers or ER principal immediately. The most obvious signs would include use of words associated with unions or union-led movements like living wage, or steward. Petitions or other concerted activity, such as an associate purporting to speak on behalf of his or her coworkers when raising concerns. Union graffiti, union t-shirts, hats, jackets, or other clothing, union flyers, and union visitors in or near the parking lot. Some signs are less obvious than finding the actual union flyer, but they can still indicate associate disengagement, which is itself a warning sign for potential organizing. Examples include associates who normally aren't connected to each other suddenly hanging out together, associates who were close suddenly stop speaking to each other, groups of associates scatter when approached by management, increased associate negativity, anger, or confrontation, unusual complaints or change in passion or detail around complaints, unusual interest in policies, benefits, employee lists, or other company information, or any other associate behavior that is out of character. For example, an associate who normally leaves promptly begins hanging out in the break room for an hour after work each day. In order to recognize warning signs, it is critical that you know what an associate's normal behavior looks like. Often, it is the change in behavior that is the warning sign, more than the actual behavior itself.
Cool. So Amazon, very successfully has stopped people from organizing with no doubt, with video. I think, I don't know, does anyone want to talk about what that video, what was a really good tactic in that video from the boss, or type it into the chat? Go for it.
The thing that, besides being creepy as hell, the thing that really stuck out to me was the language of look out for the warning signs, and clearly framing unions and organizing as something bad or evil or something dangerous.
Lucy agrees with you. Living wage, the warning signs, sudden desire to hang out with coworkers. Amazing.
One thing they said multiple times was a direct working relationship. Basically saying you can come to me with any problem just by yourself. You don't need to come as a group, and then we can work it out one-on-one. I think that I see that could really resonate with somebody who maybe isn't thinking a lot about collective power. They're like, yeah, well, what's the point in getting all these other people involved? There's just a problem with my boss, So I see that as potentially powerful on the other end.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. We would take one more.
At the very beginning, and it's still on the screen, we're not neutral, but we're not anti-union, but we're not neutral, which I don't even know what else that could mean, unless they're saying they're pro-union, which they're obviously not. So that's just some crazy cognitive dissonance. But I do think they do that because they know that kind of opens up people's minds to taking in some of this other information.
Yeah, and the thing that they're saying is true, right? If we were going to go knock on Amazon workers' doors and talk about post-pandemic, talk about the issues at work, talk about how to organize a union, we're going to talk about the shit they say. We're going to talk about a living wage. We're going to talk about hanging out with your coworkers. We're going to talk about, hanging out in the cafeteria to talk to people you don't usually work with. right? Like Amazon's not wrong. We would tell people to do that shit because it works, right? And instead of having that on, the person, instead of having that as like a conversation about how to build power, it becomes the Amazon has taken the turf and you have to play in their field, right? Which is what inoculation is. It takes over the and power of it, and you got to in order to have, start building real power. And so we want to be smart. We want to be able to do that too, right? We want to take the same tactic and talk to people about how, what the boss will do, so they're ready and prepared, and it's not a is managing fear, right? The thing that scrambles people's brains, right? If we took fear out of the equation, do you want a living wage? Yes. Do you want hazard pay? Yes. Do you want quarantine pay? Yes. Right? Those answers are really easy. I think the thing that messes it all up is fear. And so inoculation helps people work through their own fear before they have that feeling. And so the thing that helps fear is having a plan, not alone, and that you're mad and you want to change the relationship between yourself and the boss. And so what inoculation does, right, is it prevents the boss. You want to prevent the boss from controlling the conversation, right? Which is this video is a great example of Amazon controlling the realm of what kind of conversation people are ready to have. And so in order to do that, right, I think the thing that I've done in training people, is you don't always, you want to talk to people when people bring you what the boss's message, right? Dues are bad. You're never going to win. You're all alone. You're ready to say our message, right? The message of the workers, which is, this is what we're trying to win. This is how we're going to win, and you're not alone, right? We're going to do this together. We're going to get through it together. And that avoids, right, derailing allowing the company to derail and talk about a bunch of shit that doesn't matter, right? If you're trying to win something, the only thing that matters is where you're. And so the whole name of the game is to not get distracted by all the shit that gets thrown in the way. Next slide. And so what does that look like, right? What is an organizing conversation? I think inoculation is built on the back of all the training and all the work you guys have done around the agitation, around the issues, and the plan to win, and that you're going to do it together, right? Because you can tell people until you're blue in the face that the boss is going to do X, Y, Z, but if they don't trust you, if they're not agitated, they don't care, right? They don't care what the boss is going to do because they're on the boss's team. And so that's where inoculation kind of fits in the conversation. And so I think what inoculation looks like is, I think a big part of inoculation is, will the boss let you take control, right? Is the thing you're doing, like, why is the boss going to fight you, right? Because I think people aren't always ready and haven't really thought through why the boss would fight them, right? If we're doing the right thing, then the boss should just be on our team. They want what's best for us. And I think really taking people through the foundation of, what I talk about when I'm talking to folks that are about to go into a boss meeting is that, in order to have power, you have to take that power away, right? The boss, the power doesn't come from, you don't create it and add to the boss's power. You're taking it from their dead hands. And so they're going to try to stop you because they're not stupid. And so what does that look like, right? What will the boss do to stop you? What will that feel like? And I think a big one, right? The big thing that I've run into, and in my experience, one of the hardest things to get people through is, what will they're really nervous that their coworkers are going to think less of them or not trust them. And I think that's a big one to talk to people about. And then how will you respond, right? Which is the big question. You can go to the next one. I'm there. I'm with you. And so let's talk about what will the bosses do? And so there's a whole, kind of what's the field. And so they will definitely do captain audience meetings, involuntary closed door meetings. So like one-on-ones, right? Having a whole conversation on the clock or off the clock. Pull asides, held after work, right? There's a lot of media, letters, mailers, emails, phone calls, and then creating a toxic work environment, right? There can be negative aspects. And so I think these kind of fall into two categories, right? Royce, if you want to go to the next one. And so let's think about it together. What kind of concessions, incentives, respect, favors might the bosses use? And you want to put stack in the chat and I'll call you out. And so what have we seen? What have people been through? What do we think?
Small concessions that are like easy for the boss to do, but enough to like placate workers. It might be like increased time off, better scheduling.
I'm not sure if this is the right word, but I think sometimes what'll happen is you make demands and then they'll say, okay, we'll have this sort of like quality assurance group or like this, like we'll create a committee where we can like all work together to get feedback and figure stuff out together. But then it's just sort of this delayed process of not actually meeting any needs. You're just constantly working. You're like giving feedback to the boss nonstop and they act very open.
Totally.
But I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if it's quality assurance, but
it absolutely does. Yeah. In academia, folks are very familiar with this because this is well, let's make a committee. Let's start a committee about it, or let's start a task force, or let's we'll like start a task force to deal with that problem. And like a lot of times people understand that that's where like solutions go to die. And this is one of the reasons why we really want to talk about like positive bosses and good favor bosses, because like bosses with an open door policy can be just as anti-union and union busting as bosses who are like totally anti. Totally, go for it.
One example with when I was organizing at an elementary school, we were trying to get air conditioning because it was, above 90 degrees in the classrooms. And the principal said that she could come by with ice water, to help people out.
Yeah. Small concessions, little things that make the boss feel seem like they're really human, and they're really just trying to do their best, that bring none of their actual ability to bear, or none of their influence or authority to bear. And I believe Colleen is actually coming back in. So let's take one or two more. So let's see. New coffee maker in the lounge, absolutely. A box of crayons. What was the context of the box of crayons? I gotta know.
I wasn't given them, but all of my other coworkers were. It was like holidays. We work in care services and support services. So it's a lot of like, we don't have a lot of money, but it's the holiday season, so we thought we could give you crayons. That happens all the time. Little $5 gift cards here and there, and yeah, like we're all family. And like I hear no one gets into this line of work to become a millionaire. So what are you gonna do? It's like, all right, I guess we'll just accept whatever. I can go off.
No, exactly. I mean, this is 100% like, wherever you're coming from, if you are in some sort of like service work where you're doing nursing, teaching, whatever it might be, the go-to is, well, we just have to sacrifice a little for the best interest of the people that we're serving. And they can build it up and make you feel really good about it, but at the end of the day, it's still exploitation. And it's still them not using funds the way that they could be, so that they can have a little bit more, and we can have a little bit less.
Yeah.
Colleen, are you with us again?
Am I back?
You're back.
I'm back. Oh, that's so great. So lovely. and we talked about a bunch of carrots. Yeah, so
Talk about a
exciting.
bunch of carrots. Yeah.
Lovely.
Boxes of crayons, open door bosses who still won't actually ever do anything, whole 9 yards.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite example, the hotel here in Chicago told before they brought everyone into a meeting they had to cry. They get into this meeting, all of them cried, and they told, they talked about that they were a family, right? A thing many people probably have heard, but they all cried. All like 8 of them had physical tears, which was insane.
So can we do this time around? So we talked a little bit about the positives. What are the good things that can be happening? Well, good things that the bosses can try to bring into the workplace to make folks feel like things aren't actually as bad as they seem. Now let's talk about the negative side of that. What are some of the abusive or toxic things that bosses will do to try to make a workplace feel like someplace that's just not viable for organizing? Give us one.
Like suddenly raising like the scrutiny or stringency of existing policy, where things were loose before they suddenly become very tight.
Yeah. Nickel and diming people, essentially you'll see this a lot in union campaigns where if a time clock exists in your workplace, the second that a union campaign takes off, and if you've got that kind of boss, the kind that's going to go negative, folks who are going to start getting those dings or those ticks, for being a minute, 2 minutes late. In a real way. I actually had a nurse on a hospital campaign once who got dinged 3 times in a row for being 2 minutes early because they were trying to mess with their time structure so that they didn't have to count anybody as going overtime.
So maybe this one and the previous one, but I've seen it used where they attempt to create this sort of fake patina of power that workers would have. So what I saw was that we were organizing and the manager was like, well, in that case, we're all going to be a part of decisions. And I want to make sure that everybody is on board with the decisions that we make going forward. And he needed to bring another leader into the company, and he wanted to hire one of his friends who he was going to hire regardless, but he made us all interview this guy anyway. And then rather than recusing himself from the meeting about whether to bring this guy in, he presided over the meeting about whether to bring this guy in. And then when people expressed their concerns about the person, he started crying in the meeting, which contained only people he could fire, and basically created this environment where it would look to the CEO like he was the lowly, humble manager guy, and all of his underlings were threatening him with their big, mean demands.
Totally. Yeah. The misrepresentation of the power dynamic, a lot of bosses love to sort of make themselves diminutive or seem like they're actually the ones who are being victimized by the fact that why are you organizing? Why don't you just come and talk to me? Come on, give us another chance. We're trying our best. You're going to hear, this is very much this is using the personal relationship that a lot of middle managers have with their employees. Yeah, absolutely. Give us another one.
Okay, so I have it I've seen it a few times where they single out a certain employee. So that's their pet. And even when they're not around, you can tell they're kind of they're friendly with you. They're I'm on your team, but you can tell they'll talk behind your back to the bosses.
Yeah. So yeah, and then there's the flip side of that, which you'll see a lot, where a specific leader, or usually this is something that will happen before a campaign goes public and a leader is identified publicly. But if there's a rumor, especially that somebody is a leader, sometimes with some of these really negative or bad bosses, what you'll see is specific targeting of that individual with snide comments, spreading rumors. We've literally, a great example of this, actually, for those of you who are interested, it can be found in Confessions of a Union Buster. This is a book by an ex-union buster who decided that he had a come to Jesus moment and decided that he was going to try grifting on the other side of the aisle and started being a union consultant to talk about anti-union campaigns. Was paid just as much on that side as he was on the other. And so one of the things that he talks about is how he was once on a mine campaign where it was a mining town, as you would, in all the ways that you would expect. This was back in the 70s. And what did the bosses do when they found out that a few old timer miner veterans were a part of the organizing campaign? Well, they started spreading rumors that these men were cheating on their wives and actually destroyed a lot of these folks' lives by doing it. Now, one thing I do, and so we can move on to the next slide, Royce. One thing I want to be really clear on, these kind of, attacks or negative actions or real fear mongering, they can happen. They absolutely can happen, and we should be prepared for them, and we should make sure that our coworkers are prepared for them. They're more rare than the good stuff. The good stuff, it's not conflict oriented. It's easier a lot of the time. It just means, putting on a smile every once in a while, maybe ordering a pizza, trying to be a little bit more nice. It's an easier thing for a lot of bosses to do to try to play the nice card than to try to play the mean card. That being said, the mean card can be extremely effective if people are not identifying it as being a coordinated campaign from the bosses. If people just are, we have short-term memories a lot of the times as individuals. And so if we get into the sense that oh man, this is just what work is going to be like now because of this campaign that's happening, that is how a lot of people will associate it. We tried to do something, we tried to take action, we tried to organize, and now the work culture is all messed up and everything's toxic and terrible. And that's why it's so important that we're inoculating and making it clear to people that this is something that is short-term, this is short-lived, and the way that we get through it is by getting through it together. And we have to keep organizing and keep going and use a lot of this stuff as the agitation of, man, if the bosses are willing to do this to us just because we're trying to make some improvements for ourselves in our lives, isn't that kind of messed up? And shouldn't that actually be the reason that we keep going? And so as we're sort of thinking through how we're going to be responding to a lot of this messaging in the activity, I want you to just keep in mind that the goal here is to not get derailed, whether the action is good or bad. And so you've got a lot of bad actions that you can sort of see here. There's things like, management gets personal, spreading a rumor that you've cheated on your wife. We know it's you. This is a sneaky one, and actually in EWOC, this is the one that you'll come up against the most often with workers, where if a worker is putting together a petition or something like that, we have had 3 different campaigns that I can just off the top of my head that were derailed because the initial person who was starting to put together a petition and starting to bring together an organizing committee, they weren't penalized. There was nothing happened to them. All the boss did was say, we know it's you. We know that you're the one doing this. And that was enough to scare some of these folks from continuing to organize. And, in a large part, it was because they were at that point still alone. They didn't have partners or other folks organizing with them yet. So it can be extremely effective, and it doesn't have to be, a direct attack. Can't afford it. Not doable. You're going to hear this one all the time, especially now. We're in a time of austerity. Money is going to be tight for small business owners. And I'll leave it there because anything bigger than that, the money exists. They're just going to hide it. But the reality is, in every business, choices are being made. And even if the money isn't there, as workers, you should be able to negotiate with your boss and say, well, then let's figure out how we can make conditions better with whatever strapped cash we have. Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about workplace democracy. We're talking about engaging as equals. And the way that you engage as equals is even when times are tough, you're going to come together and actually be able to figure it out through a negotiation. Outside agitators, if you're in a union campaign, you'll hear this till you're blue in the face. Thankfully, most bosses don't understand what the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee even is, and so they don't really know how to typify it as an outside agitator. But it really doesn't take much. All they have to do is get a sense that like someone else is involved in this process, and all of a sudden that person is an outside agitator who's just stirring stuff up. And the way that we can often respond to that is just by saying like, well, we believe that these issues are real. No one's telling us that these issues existed. We experienced these issues. So clearly it didn't take an outside agitator. And then divide and conquer, rumor mill, etc. Actions, messing with people's schedules. That tends to happen with a lot of this bad action. Write-ups and retaliation. Recruiting anti-union leaders or trying to take people who bosses think are a part of the organizing committee and pull them over to the anti-union side by giving them small, direct dealings. So like, a promotion, a good favor, recommendation, whatever it might be. Recruiting scabs and hiring union busters. And then the worst of them all, the one that is extremely hard to organize against, delays. Just taking a long time, no matter what it is. Organizing is active. It requires activity. The easiest thing that the boss can do is just not respond and to not engage over and over and over again, because that forces you to have to continue escalating against a brick wall until the heat gets too much for them to bear. It can be hard to continue escalating when you're not getting a response that you can then launch your next step of a campaign off of. And so these kinds of delay tactics or brick walls, they're very effective, and we just have to be able to keep people energized enough to keep going. Let's keep going. The boss campaign really is rarely creative. So these bingo cards are used by a lot of union organizers because they can. You can walk into a captive audience meeting. You can send worker leaders into a captive audience meeting with a bingo card. And every time that I've done this with nurse leaders, they came out with a full bingo. They use the same tips and tricks. They use the same tools. It's very common. And we're actually working on preparing one of these for EWOC campaigns as well, which we'll be distributing after the training. So how do we respond? We just heard a lot of fear. We just heard a lot of things that could derail us. How do we make sure that they don't? So the clearest way that we can actually get into that, the clearest way that we can make sure that, okay, folks, bear with me. Colleen, do you want to try and do this last slide?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
And I think I figured it out. I'm on my phone. Thank you, Zach. What a wonderful human. So, so I think everything the boss, I think people can get confused, right? It's a lot of rhetoric coming at you all at once. And sometimes the scariest time that people have ever felt so much contention. And so I think whatever they do, I think the most important thing in inoculation is to hammer home that whatever the boss does is that they're doing it to beat us, right? There's no world in which the boss is doing something not to beat back and keep the status quo of the reason we organized. They are only doing what they are doing in any way, if that is a carrot, if it's a nice thing, if it's a terrifying thing. They're only doing it to beat us into submission and beat us back. And the only way through that is together, making a plan and sticking together and persevering. And so every single win, every single concession is we did it, we won it, right? They give us $4, we say thank you, and I want my other $4, right? Every loss, every attack is agitation, right? You go to your coworkers, can you believe what they just did? Can you believe what they just said? Can you believe this? Can you believe that? Right? Every single attack is only to keep the fire going in your coworkers, to keep up the energy to keep going towards the goal. And in order to do that, you want to stick to the issues, right? You can spend your whole life talking about what the boss wants you to talk about, which is what they want, right? You got to stick to the issues if that is whatever you found in agitation. Better healthcare, better pay, hazard pay, the right to work without, risking your whole family's health. And so it's hard, right? I mean, I think this part is really hard. It's really hard when you're being attacked by when all your coworkers are coming at you and saying, well, my manager told me that we're going to have to pay dues, or my manager told me, I'll be fired if I do that, or we're never going to win. And so you have to be really clear and really disciplined with yourself that it's not about the boss, it's about the issues that you want to win, right? It's about the issues that we talked about for the last 2 months, and that those are not going to be fixed unless we have control to continue to fix them. And so you have to stay on your message. And I think this other piece that is really hard is that whenever you talk, if you're talking to the boss, if you're talking to your coworkers, if you're on a picket line, the people you actually are talking to is your coworkers, right? You're always playing, it's a numbers game, right? You're always playing for the folks you don't have in the unit. And so when you are talking to your boss, it's the same rules, right? You don't want to argue with them about their bullshit anti-union tactics. You want to talk about why you're doing this terrifying thing to change your life and what is at risk and why you're risking it, and what you need. And so you want to stay on your message, even when you're going toe to toe with a boss or a manager or an angry guest.
All right, folks. Well, it is 8:45 where I am, and it's later for some of you, earlier for others, but one way or another, I'm just gonna have us all do one last fun thing. If everybody can come off mute, we're gonna do a big solidarity forever, and then we're gonna sign off. So everybody come off mute, and 3, 2, 1.
Solidarity forever.
Forever.
You all on the flip side, keep organizing, fighting, and sign up to volunteer with EWOC if you haven't already.